Speaker, for allowing me to speak in this debate. And I stand today to discuss the economic aspects of this deal. But the fact is, too much is still uncertain. What we do know is that the government's own economic analysis illustrates that this deal will make our country poorer. With GDP falling by around 3.9%, in real terms this means 100 billion in every region of the UK being worse off. I note with enormous disappointment that the Prime Minister has dropped achieving frictionless trade as a priority, and it seems there will be barriers to trading goods. On the service sector, the political declaration states market access will be limited, and on areas such as financial services, it offers no firm mechanism to protect the industry. Mr. Speaker, like many in this chamber, I was devastated when I realised that more electorates had voted to leave the EU. However, it soon became apparent that no one really knew what this meant and how this would affect all regions and nations of the UK. In this respect, the referendum lacked clarity, as the precise effects of leaving has only recently become more clearer. There is much speculation as to why our nation voted the way it did and what this meant. And like my right honourable friend from Sheffield and South East, we do need to think about why people voted the way they did. And there is a loss in the division and the debate of the last 2 years about the analysis of why people voted the way they did and why it varies and was so different in many parts of our country. It is clear to me that poverty has a part to play in this and the ongoing lack of opportunity. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation reveals that poverty is very high in terms of 14 million people being affected and 4.1 million children being in poverty. This is a shocking statistic. The recession and the long, hard-hitting austerity has seen many people made redundant, many being forced to take zero-hour contracts, and in-work poverty where they may have 2 or 3 jobs but still in poverty. A rise in food prices, a rise in fuel prices, wages falling behind the standard and the cost of living, a sharp spike in private rental accommodation, and people living in private rental accommodation often being on unbearable conditions. Buying property in certain parts of the country becoming unattainable, and social housing waiting lists forever growing longer in many parts of our country. People, especially in London areas, being placed in B&Bs, in temporary accommodations, and often being placed too far away from taking their children to school or their place of work or where they care for their loved ones. We've seen an increase to the threat of terrorism, an increase in prison population, and the ability to attain higher education moving further away from some people and their families. And a rise in food bank provision makes people feel like they have failed in life, when really it's the government who needs to be held to account for this. The Leave campaign focused on a contentious message of blame culture. Let's blame others, immigrants, using them as a scapegoat, when really the nation's sense of dissatisfaction should have laid at the government's doorstep. It is successive governments that are failing to create jobs, failing to correct the benefit system, failing to provide education bursaries, to regulate rents in the private sector, to build more social homes, to root out racism and discrimination in our society, to promote gender equality by giving pensions to WASPy women, to invest more in education, higher education, and failing to invest in our public services. Many of my constituents are proud to be called Europeans, with 70% of people in the borough voting to remain. A deal is an agreement, but this deal has not been ratified by our country. So what is the only way to regain a mandate on a clear way forward? Although I have faith in the members of this House, I feel the gravity of this decision is too much for us alone. If the Prime Minister is confident in her proposals, in her proposed negotiations, she should feel confident enough to bring it before the electorate. Under these circumstances, it is only right that the people are given some say over what happens next. This is not about frustrating Brexit. It is about allowing people to make an informed decision across the country on a known quantity. Before the Prime Minister sets her Brexit boat sailing, the Right Honourable Lady needs to consider the weather and the course of the journey, because it will be too late to turn back if the weather gets tough. I cannot vote for anything that will make our country poorer.